Wyoming Territory, August 1879. The sun was high and mean when Abram Vexley rode into the dry-boned town of Gilt Creek, dust thick on his boots and the weight of something unfinished sitting heavy in his chest. He had not planned on stopping. But fate had a way of laying its hand down hard when you least expected it. He had come for supplies, nothing more. A saddle strap had torn on the trail north from Rawlins, and his horse, a stubborn bay named Roper, had started favoring his left leg. Abram was bone-tired and not in the mood for trouble, but trouble found him anyway. He was tying Roper outside the general store when he heard it shouting. A man's voice, loud and sharp, coming from the house across the street. It was a big house, whitewashed and proud, with wide windows and a wraparound porch. Wealth, or the memory of it, clung to its bones. The yelling stopped, and then came the sound of something heavy wood, maybe being dragged across a floor. A boy, no older than 10, stood at the edge of the dirt road, frozen. His fists were clenched and his eyes brimmed with something too old for a child to carry. "You all right there, son?" Abram asked, stepping off the boardwalk. The boy didn't answer. He just looked up at the house, then back at Abram. "They locked her in again." "Who?" "My sister." The boy's name was Paulie, and his voice shook when he spoke. He told Abram everything in a quiet rush: how his sister had come home with her belly rounded, how their parents had called her a disgrace and said she had shamed the family, how they had dragged her down into the cellar and barred the door. That was 2 weeks ago. "Nobody's helped her," Paulie said. "They say she deserves it." Abram felt something in him crack. He had seen cruelty before. He had watched men die on muddy fields, their hands reaching for mothers who would never come. But this was something else. "What's her name?" he asked. "Gwen," Paulie whispered. "Gwen Tiller." The name hung in Abram's chest like a bell, ringing low and deep. He didn't know her, but in that moment he knew he would help her. He crossed the road without thinking twice. The cellar door was around the back, hidden from the street. It was padlocked shut, thick iron looped through warped wood. The windows were boarded up. No light, no air. He pounded on it once. "Gwen," he called. Nothing. He knelt, pressed his ear to the door. A soft rasp answered, barely audible, like the air had to crawl just to get out. "I'm getting you out of there," he said. A voice from inside, hoarse and cracked, whispered. "No one ever does." Abram stood, jaw clenched, and stepped back. He braced his shoulder, took one look at the lock, and drove his weight into it. The wood cracked, screamed, then splintered open. Dust exploded from the dark, and the smell of rot and fear hit him hard. She was there, curled in on herself at the bottom of the steps. Her dress hung off her like wilted cotton. Her arms were thin, and her face was shadowed with grime and bruises. But her eyes, God, her eyes. They were wide and green, and they locked on him like she did not dare believe he was real. He reached out a hand. "Walk free." She stared at him, unmoving. "I'm not here to hurt you. My name's Abram Vexley. Your brother told me." At the sound of Paulie's name, her mouth trembled. "You're not one of them?" she asked. He shook his head. "No, ma'am, I'm not." Her knees gave a little when she stood, and he caught her before she fell. She was light, too light. He steadied her, felt the way she leaned just enough to stay upright. She did not cry, she did not speak. She just walked with him out into the light like a ghost coming back to life. Paulie ran to her, arms tight around her waist. "I told you I'd find someone," he said. Gwen cupped his face with one shaking hand. "You saved me." "No," Paulie said, glancing at Abram. "He did." They did not go back inside. Abram took them both straight to his horse. The sun was starting to dip behind the hills, gold bleeding into the sky. Roper was tired, but he didn't complain as Abram lifted Gwen into the saddle and helped Paulie climb up behind her. "Where will we go?" she asked, voice small. "There's a ranch about half a day's ride from here," Abram said. "Belongs to me, you'll be safe there." She looked down at him, her fingers clinging to the horn of the saddle. "Why are you helping me?" He met her gaze, steady and honest. "Because no one else did." They rode out of Gilt Creek just as the first stars came out. No one tried to stop them. The town watched from behind curtains and turned away. Gwen did not speak again until they were miles out and the land stretched wide and quiet around them. Paulie had fallen asleep against her back. "I thought I was going to die in there," she said. Abram rode beside her, close enough that their knees brushed now and then. "You did not," he said softly. "You are still here." She turned her head, looked at him through the dusk. "You broke the door." "Only because it needed breaking." She smiled, slow and tired. "Thank you." He tipped his hat. "You are welcome, Gwen Tiller." And for the first time in a long while she believed maybe good men still existed. The wind shifted east as they crested the last ridge. Abram's ranch sat in the hollow below, flanked by cottonwoods and the slow bend of a creek that hadn't run dry in years. The house was modest, 2 rooms and a stout chimney made of fieldstone, but the boards were solid and the roof kept rain off. A smaller structure nearby housed the tack and tools, and behind it stretched pasture land gone gold in the late summer light. Gwen's fingers tightened on the saddle horn as they descended. She hadn't spoken since dusk, but every so often she glanced sideways, as if trying to piece together what sort of man would do what Abram had done. Paulie stirred against her back, still half asleep, his arms looped loosely around her waist. Abram dismounted first and reached up to lift the boy down. Paulie blinked, confused by the sudden stillness, then looked around and whispered, "It's quiet here." "It stays that way," Abram said, placing a steadying hand on his shoulder. "You hungry?" Paulie nodded. "Good. I'll get a fire going." Gwen slid off next. Her legs buckled at the landing, but she caught herself before he could reach for her. She straightened, chin lifted, and took in the place with a wary silence. "You can rest inside," Abram said, gesturing to the house. "There's a cot in the back room and clean water in the basin. I'll bring something warm once the stew's ready." She didn't answer at first, just looked past him toward the creek. Then her voice came, quiet but steady. "You live here alone?" "I do. By choice." He nodded. "It's easier that way." She looked at the house again. "You built it?" "Every board." She hesitated, then stepped toward the porch. "Then it's strong." He watched her cross the threshold without another word and didn't follow. Instead, he turned to the shed, gathered kindling and a few thick logs, and knelt beside the outdoor hearth. Paulie sat on the porch steps, eyes tracing the sky. "Mr. Vexley." Abram struck flint to steel and caught the spark. "Call me Abram." "Why'd you leave wherever you were before?" He laid a measured breath between the question and the answer. "Not all places are worth staying." Paulie nodded like that made perfect sense. "Did you fight in the war?" "I did." "You kill anybody?" Abram fed another stick to the flames. "Enough to know I never want to again." Paulie fell quiet. The fire caught strong and Abram hung the pot over it, the scent of salt pork and beans beginning to rise. Inside, Gwen stood before the looking glass above the basin, her face barely recognizable to herself. Dirt still clung in streaks, her lips cracked, and her eyes set too deep from days without sleep held a guarded light. She drew her fingers through her hair, wincing when she met a knot. The water was cold, but she splashed it over her cheeks anyway, welcoming the sting. The cot in the corner had a wool blanket folded at its foot. She touched it, then sat, her back straight. She didn't lie down. When Abram knocked, she didn't flinch. He stepped just inside, holding a bowl and a tin cup. "Stew's hot," he said. "Coffee too, if you're strong enough for it." She took them both, her hands steady now. "Thank you." He paused, watching her take the first sip, Then, I've got a neighbor rides by every few days, widow named Hester. Tough as a pine knot and not shy about opinions. She'll bring cloth if you need. Gwen looked up over the rim of the cup. Why are you telling me that? Because I don't know what you need, and I figure she'll ask the questions I don't have sense to. She set the cup down. I don't need charity. I'm not offering any. Her eyes narrowed just a touch. Then what is this? He didn't drop his gaze. It's a place to start again if you want it. No one had offered her anything like that before, not without cost. She studied him for a long moment. You said you live alone by choice, but you let us in without hesitation. I did. Why? He looked toward the open door where Paulie's silhouette leaned forward in the fading light. Because I knew what kind of man I'd be if I didn't. She didn't reply, but something in her shoulders eased. He stepped back. Get some rest. Tomorrow we'll patch that saddle bag and see if the mare's got any swelling in her leg. Before he closed the door, she said, Are you always like this? He glanced over his shoulder. Only when it matters. Then he was gone, his boots fading across the boards and down into the dirt. She sat perfectly still, the stew cooling in her lap, and watched the way the lantern light flickered against the walls. She wasn't sure what kind of place this was yet. But she could feel something in her chest that hadn't stirred in weeks. Not hope, not yet, but the beginnings of it. The sun rose slow and pale, its early light filtering through the narrow kitchen window. Gwen stood barefoot on the cool planks, one hand around a chipped mug, the other resting lightly on her growing stomach. The warmth of the coffee seeped into her fingers, but she wasn't drinking. She watched the steam curl upward and listened to the soft rustle of Paulie shifting in his sleep behind the curtain that separated the rooms. Outside, a shovel bit into dry earth. She stepped closer to the window and saw Abram at the edge of the garden plot, sleeves rolled, hat low. Each movement was measured, deliberate. He wasn't planting, just turning the soil, steady and without hurry. She pulled the shawl tighter around her shoulders and stepped out onto the porch. You're not farming anything, she said. Abram paused mid-swing. Not yet. So why bother? He leaned on the handle and looked toward her. Because something always comes when the ground's ready. She came down the steps, the hem of her dress brushing the grass. You ever grow anything out here? Turnips once. They came up bitter. He shrugged. Still fed me through the winter. She stood beside the fence post, arms crossed. Paulie wants to go into town. He say why? He wants to send a wire to a friend of my uncle's. Thinks maybe we can ride east. Abram leaned against the shovel. You want that? I don't know, she said. I haven't thought that far. I've been trying to sleep through the night without dreaming of locked doors. He nodded. You will. She looked down at the soil, dark and fresh. You believe things come back after they've been broken? He didn't answer right away. Then, I believe people do. She glanced up, eyes catching his. That why you stay out here alone? He pushed the shovel into the dirt again. Some things take time to mend. I figure they need quiet to do it. She didn't press further. A breeze ran through the cottonwoods, stirring the air between them. Later that morning, Paulie helped Abram fetch water from the creek. Gwen watched from the porch as the boy asked questions about fish and how to tell if weather was turning. Abram answered each one with that same easy patience, his voice low and even. She noticed how he let Paulie carry the bucket back, even though it sloshed and soaked the boy's boots. Inside, she cleared the tin plates and scrubbed them clean. She found dried herbs in a sack near the stove, yarrow, chamomile, and wild mint bundled tight with twine. She didn't ask who'd gathered them. By early afternoon, Abram returned from the shed with a length of canvas and a small crate tucked under one arm. He set them down near the porch and opened the lid. I found these, he said. Old sewing things, might be useful. She lifted the top spool, fingers brushing the soft indigo thread. You fix everything you find, only the things worth keeping. She looked up, unsure what to say to that. That evening she sat on the porch steps with needle in hand, mending a tear in Paulie's coat. Abram brought out a tin of oil and began cleaning his rifle, the metal catching the last orange light. "Was your mother kind?" she asked suddenly. He didn't look up. She had a quiet way. Sang under her breath when she worked. Mine didn't. I figured. She hesitated, then went on. They didn't always hate me. Just started to once I stopped agreeing. You regret speaking up. I regret thinking they'd listen. Silence stretched again, but it felt different now, like something shared instead of something hidden. He clicked the chamber closed. You're not the first to be cast out for standing tall. No, she said, but I might be the first to survive it. You will. She looked at him then, really looked. The lines at the corners of his mouth, the way his hands moved with care even when handling something dangerous. What happened to your people? She asked. He sat back, resting the rifle across his knees. Gone, mostly. Fever took my brother. The rest scattered after the war. Some went north, others faded into towns. I stayed. Because you had nowhere else, he shook his head. Because I had this. She looked out at the land, the creek winding slow, the cottonwoods tall and still. It's not much. It's steady, he said. She let her hands fall to her lap. Would you let us stay if we chose? I would. No questions. One. He looked straight at her. Do you want to? She didn't answer right away. But she didn't look away either. And when the night came down full and deep, she lingered beside him long after the lamps were lit, hands empty now but no longer trembling. The fence line had started to sag near the north end, where the wind came hard off the ridge. Abram drove a wedge beneath the post and leaned his shoulder into it, grit in his teeth, sweat darkening the back of his collar. He didn't hear Gwen approach until her shadow stretched beside his. You need another set of hands, he straightened, brushing dust from his palms. You know how to brace a cross beam. I know how to follow direction. He passed her the mallet. Then you're already ahead of most men I've hired. She worked without complaint, holding the rail steady while he drove the pins through with slow, even strikes. Her sleeves were rolled to the elbow, a ribbon of faded blue tied around her braid to keep it off her neck. She didn't glance over at him, even as sweat pooled at her temple and dust clung to her skirts. You always do your work like it's penance, she asked, voice low. He set the mallet down. Not penance. Just keeps my hands from remembering things they shouldn't. She leaned back on her heels. And what about your heart? He looked out across the pasture. Some days it forgets what it lost. That's enough. She nodded, picked up the next rail, mine still learning how to beat without flinching. They worked until the sun dipped behind the ridge, the sky bleeding orange at the edges. Paulie called from the creek, his voice carrying clear and bright. Gwen turned toward the sound, her face softening. He found a frog and named it Walter. Abram raised an eyebrow. That the name of someone he liked? No, she said. Someone he didn't. Seemed fitting. He chuckled once, the sound rough with disuse. Gwen looked at him, eyes catching the last of the light. I want to stay. He met her gaze. You sure? I'm not running anymore. I don't want Paulie to grow up thinking survival is something you do with your back to the door. Abram picked up the mallet again, turning it slowly in his hand. There's space here, it's quiet, but it ain't easy. I've had easy, she said. It cost too much. He nodded once, then gestured to the next post. Let's finish the line. They worked until dusk swallowed the field whole, and when they returned to the house, Gwen laid a quilt out by the hearth and showed Paulie how to grind dried corn with the stone mill Abram had long stopped using. She didn't ask permission. She didn't need to. That night, after Paulie had drifted off with his arm curled around his frog in a jar, Gwen stood just outside the door, arms folded against the cool air. Abram joined her, boots scuffing softly on the porch. "Storm's coming," he said, nodding to the west where the clouds had begun to gather in thick, dark bands. She didn't answer right away. "I used to dread the sound of thunder," she said. "It meant I couldn't hear what was coming down the hall." He didn't speak, just waited. "But here," she continued, "it's just weather." He glanced at her, then out at the land. "It's more than that. It's warning and it's promise. You learn how to read it, it'll tell you what's worth sheltering." She shifted slightly closer. "And what about people? They tell you too," he said. "If you know how to listen." Silence stretched, not heavy but full. Gwen let her weight lean slightly toward him, not touching, just near, close enough that the warmth of him reached her skin. "I don't know how to be anything but what I am now," she said. "That's the part worth keeping." She looked at him, long and sure, and for the first time in her life she didn't feel like she had to hide what she was feeling. He held her gaze. "You're not a burden here, not to me." A breath left her then, quiet and full. "You're not what I expected." "I've had time to wear the sharp edges off." The wind shifted, pulling at the hem of her dress. "I'm not afraid of storms anymore," she said. He reached for her hand slowly, letting her see the offer before it came. She didn't hesitate. Her fingers slipped into his, firm and steady. Inside, the fire burned low, casting its glow across the walls. Outside, the wind carried the scent of rain, and between them, something old and quiet began to settle like roots pressing deep into good soil. The storm passed in the night, soft-footed and slow, leaving the world rinsed and quiet. By morning, the roof still held, the creek ran a little faster, and the air smelt of damp earth and pine needles. Gwen stood behind the house, apron tied over her dress, sleeves damp to the elbows as she leaned over the washtub. Her hands worked steady, the rhythm of wringing and rinsing as natural now as breathing. Abram stepped out of the shed with a coil of rope slung over one shoulder and paused to watch her. She didn't notice at first, brow furrowed, a loose strand of hair curling against her cheek. When she looked up, her expression didn't soften or smile, but her eyes met his and held there like a thread pulled taut. No questions, no small talk, just the quiet knowing that had become their way. He nodded toward the trees. "I set 2 traps near the creek last week." "Might have caught something." She straightened, wiping her hands on a cloth. "You want help skinning?" "I'd take it." They walked without hurry, Paulie still inside, bent over a cracked atlas Abram had found at the bottom of a trunk. The boy had taken to mapping the world in pencil scratches and quiet wonder, content to let the grown folk wear out their bones while he traced rivers he'd never seen. The traps had caught 2 rabbits, both clean. Gwen crouched beside Abram as he laid one across the flat rock they used for dressing game. Her hands didn't tremble. She asked for the knife, and he passed it without hesitation. "I used to help my uncle clean pigeons," she said, slicing with practiced care. "He kept them for racing, not food. But when one broke a wing, he didn't believe in waste." Abram wrapped the second rabbit in cloth. "He teach you how to cook them, better than he taught me how to forgive him." He didn't ask more. Some memories didn't need the weight of words. They returned to the house just before midmeal. Gwen slipped inside to prepare the meat while Abram led Roper to the trough. The mare was healing, the swelling gone, the limp fading. She'd be sound again soon, and he knew that meant choices would come. Inside, the scent of rosemary and salt ticked through the air as Gwen stirred the pot. Paulie looked up from the table, his finger halfway across the black hills. "Does the land out there look like this?" he asked. Abram nodded. "Rougher. Wind carves the stone like a knife through butter. You ever see a buffalo? Once, south of Fort Laramie. Big as a wagon and twice as stubborn." Paulie grinned, then turned back to the map. Gwen's voice came from the hearth. If we're staying, I'd like to fix the back room. The roof leaks. Abram leaned against the doorway. You're sure now? I've lived in finer houses and felt less at home. This place holds. He folded his arms. I've got cedar planks in the shed. You pick the day, I'll bring the nails. That night, after Paulie settled in his makeshift bed, Gwen stepped out to the porch. Abram sat sharpening a drawknife, the rasp of metal on stone steady and slow. She eased down beside him, the boards warm beneath her skirts. I've been thinking, she said, about what comes next. He didn't stop the blade's motion. I figured you might. I want something solid, not just shelter, not just safe. He looked at her then, the drawknife resting in his lap. Tell me what you need. I want to wake up each morning knowing I'll see the same faces. I want to plant something and watch it grow. I want to raise this child where silence doesn't mean danger. He set the blade aside. Then let's build that. Her hand found his, fingers lacing slow and sure. You mean it? I've meant it since the day I found you in that cellar. She turned toward him, eyes tracing the lines time had drawn across his face. You've carried your own shadows, I see that. I don't mind the dark, he said. Not if you're beside me. She leaned in then, her lips brushing his, soft as the hush before rain. And when he kissed her back, it wasn't hurried or hungry, but steady and whole, like something returning to its rightful place. They married at the end of September, beneath the cottonwoods while the leaves turned gold. Hester stood witness, her hands full of dried sage and remarking, without invitation, that Gwen had finally learned how to pick a man worth the trouble. Paulie wore boots 2 sizes too big and grinned through the whole thing, each tooth a declaration of belonging. With winter coming, they finished the roof together and sealed the windows. Gwen stitched blankets from old coats. Abram built a cradle by hand, carving her name beneath the slats. The child came in the spring, a girl with dark hair and lungs that filled the cabin with new sound. They named her Ruth, and in each season that followed, they planted more beans, corn, and peach saplings from a neighbor's cutting. The land gave back slow, but sure. Gwen kept her hands busy and her heart open. Abram never left a tool out of place, nor a promise unkept. Paulie grew into his boots and then out of them, and took to riding the fence line with a rifle slung across his back, scanning the horizon like it belonged to him. The house stood through storm and drought, its boards worn smooth by time and touch. Some nights, Gwen would sit beside Abram on the porch, her head on his shoulder, and they would watch the stars come out one by one. They never spoke of the cellar again. Because here, in this quiet patch of Wyoming earth, nothing waited behind locked doors. Everything worth keeping stood in the open, held in the light.